believe in myself and trust my gut, which sounds a little bit soft, but it's not soft at all. Like really learning that your instincts, if you're a business owner and you've been successful for some time, are good, and you lean into those. You don't clamp those down.
Designed to encourage, empower, and educate real estate professionals by sharing best practices from business leaders that are proven winners. I'm your host, Kyle Malnati, and this is Calibrate Real Estate. Broadcasting from the Mile High City, thank you for tuning in to the Calibrate Real Estate Podcast. As you know, I'm your host, Kyle Malnati, and today our esteemed guest is Stephanie Lanier. She is the broker owner of the Lanier Property Group based out of Wilmington, North Carolina. Say hello, Stephanie. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, y'all.
All right. I love the y'all. You know you're in the South when you hear y'all. So Stephanie and I got connected by a good friend and past podcast guest, Brad Allen. Brad is taking the reins for our 30 Under 30 reunion that's coming up here in a few months. And Stephanie is going to be a keynote speaker. Stephanie and I have never actually met before, but we've been on a phone call and now we're on the Zoom call. So we feel like we're good friends. And Stephanie operates this boutique brokerage firm in Wilmington, North Carolina. That's a team of 6 full-time agents. And Stephanie, tell me what's a little bit different about your firm. As we were prepping, we were talking about kind of that tortoise and the hare mentality, as well as the type of people that you fill your firm with.
Yes. So we have all working moms on our team, which is pretty fun. And most of us drive minivans. So out in our parking lot, we call it the minivan mafia. It's pretty funny. And we're always dashing to like get chicken nuggets out of the floorboard and stuff before we take clients out. So we certainly do not fit the kind of stereotype of luxury vehicles that are always cleaned out. I just got the new Honda Odyssey minivan and it has a vacuum in it, which is changing my life. I use it constantly. So yeah, that's our team. And we've grown really slow and really intentionally after about 2 years ago, trying to grow really fast and not getting the right cultural fit and not having the right bandwidth for training. So we've kind of created a new methodology and system. We're hoping to bring on our 7th agent in a few weeks, which we're really excited about. So it's a dream come true, the team I get to work with every day. It's I was told over and over again it wasn't possible, especially with women. And I think people just often layer their own bad experiences into the advice that they give you versus just saying like, go for it. You can give it a try. So it's been really cool. And when we say family comes first here, we really live that out.
I love that. I love the minivan mafia. That's hilarious. And then as the owner of the new Odyssey with the vacuum, you're like the cool kid in the office, right? With the souped up minivan. I love it.
Yeah, it is. I have the newest minivan. So yes. And the other thing that agents love is like in that minivan, there's a camera where you can see what's happening in the back 2 rows. So you can sort of like zoom in. So if your kid was like, you know, we only have 1 child, but if you had 2 kids and they were like hitting each other, whatever, but we have a lot of fun with it. So yeah,
I love it.
Great. It's just like, I think the sort of piece about that is that you need to be who you really are in real estate. Like you don't have to drive a Range Rover if that's not who you really are. If it is, great, drive it. But like I'm a minivan mom. I have a kid with special needs. So if you meet me and you work with me, we're rolling in the minivan.
I love it. Yeah. And you relate to people that are going to have similar experiences to you. And you still have a nice, clean, well-operating vehicle. For years, I drove a slightly used Honda Accord. It had a V6. I'm still a guy and I still like a little bit of power, but I mean, most people look at it and they're like, Kyle, you make over 6 figures, you know, you're a top producer and you're driving an Accord around. I'm like, yeah, I'm just kind of a pretty conservative, straightforward guy. So I totally get it. One of the cool things that I want to just share and celebrate with our audience is that you were the winner of Curator's Pitch Fest, which is kind of the battle of the brokerages. And for our podcast subscribers, you'll know Jimmy Mackin is one of the co-founders of Curator. So that'll be a name that's been familiar because Jimmy's been on 2 of our podcast episodes. So let's talk about what that was like, and then we'll dive into your family life and just some of your mission here as a real estate agent, but also a speaker.
Cool. Well, I think the world of Jimmy Mackin. He has been a huge part of my journey. He's the reason that I launched a second business, which I have called the Inspiration Lab, which is for working women, which is a subscription model. So he helped me set that up, and I will forever be grateful for that. But at the Curator Conference in the fall, we had a pitch fest where there were 7 different agents representing 7 different brokerages. And so we had 2.5 minutes, which y'all, that is not very long, to pitch our model. And so I was up there with Keller Williams and Berkshire Hathaway and Compass. I mean, it was really, really, I felt a little bit like David and Goliath, where I'm like, I'm representing all independent boutique brokerages, like in the world, me. I mean, you know, but I went up and I shared our story, why we started Lanier Property Group, and really encouraged people to think about if there was something that they needed to create that they wish existed, whether that was a brokerage or a team or a nonprofit or a school for their kid, that we're all called to start things if we're a leader. And so it could be a brokerage or it might not. And I think that resonated with people more than here are our splits, or here's our give back model, or here's our technology. People just connect to story, and people connect to a mission and a vision. So that's what I decided to share. And also, since we're a tiny brokerage, my splits and fees were not going to be interesting to the group. Like, that wouldn't provide value. So I gave my talk. It was great. And then there was like this second round where we had to go head to head, where Jimmy and Chris like threw us all these really hard questions. And you know how intense Chris is. Jimmy's like nicer, but Chris is just like totally in your face. And I'm sure you'll probably hear this, but it's true. They're a good yin and a yang. And yeah, they asked us questions. They sort of basically gave us objections as if they were a broker who was going to join our firm. And so it was great. It was awesome. And I ended up winning, and that was really cool. And we, the 2 of us who got to the final round, they each gave us some money and a t-shirt, and it was just really fun. It was a really cool thrill. And I just felt so proud to try to represent my friends in the independent brokerage world, because it is lonely, and it's also a really bold thing to do. I mean, it's to start something from nothing is a really big leap. And so it was awesome.
One of the best pieces of advice that I received in 2016 was from my career coach at the time, Chris Oakley. And Chris and I are good friends to this day. Chris was one of our podcast guests at the very beginning. And I asked him, I said, look, I'm going to start my own brokerage firm. I was very seriously considering a national franchise model. And he said, look, I'd do it on your own. And that was what I wanted to hear. That was what I was hoping to hear, that validation. And I just applaud you for supporting and representing the independent brokerage, which far exceeds the amount of companies that are out there on the larger scale. There's kind of this death by 1,000 cuts approach with all of the independents out there. So I definitely appreciate you representing us. And diving back into your answer, I love that concept. And I wrote this down as a note as we were on our original phone call, that this idea that having a business where you create the things you wish existed. And I could hear that in talking about your purpose and talking about doing things outside of just your day-to-day real estate. So let's dive into that a little bit, and then we'll talk about your family.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, when I got into real estate, so I had been a stay-at-home mom for a few years, and our son Oliver got diagnosed with a rare genetic disorder. He was airlifted to Chapel Hill, which is about 2.5 hours away. And we were told he had brain tumors, he would have developmental delays, that he would have autism, and that he would need care the rest of his life. And it just totally reoriented everything. And so the first year I stayed at home with him, but about 1.5 years into that, the medical bills were piling up. And I was honestly in a pretty dark place, because when you watch your kid have seizure after seizure and lose their ability to speak, and that's the only thing you're doing all day, it's hard to sort of find joy or validation, or I don't know, I love to check things off a box, and I wasn't able to do that, you know. And I don't think I knew how much of a sort of achiever type that I was until I was staying at home and found that real tension, which I think a lot of stay-at-home moms feel. So I got my real estate license, and I loved it, and I like to go to school, so I was like, this is great. And so then I looked around, and I wanted to find a company with great marketing that understood social media, which I know sounds silly, but in 2012, that was still kind of a new idea. And then also a company that really put family first. And it wasn't just on the wall, but like, I knew that Oliver was going to have a ton of surgeries. I was going to miss a lot of work, and I was going to need this team that really could meet me where I was at, which was a hard place. And so I couldn't find both. I could find one or the other. And so kind of naively, I was like, well, I'll just start this and see if it works, because I honestly had nothing to lose. Like, when you have a kid who's medically fragile and you know that at any moment you could lose them, it's not that you don't care about business, but it reorients what that quote failure looks like. I mean, it would be sad. I would not be happy if my business failed, but my business is not a person, and it's actually not my child, even though we talk about it a lot of times that way. Like it is a different thing. So I think it's good to keep a healthy balance. And so we started Lanier Property Group, and off we went. And then, I mean, with create the things you wish existed, here are some other examples. I wish that we knew what Midtown was in Wilmington. So I created a map, and I said, this is Midtown. And the paper ran with it, and people embraced it. And we sort of created this group of business owners in the Midtown area, which was really cool. And that's how I got to be named one of our most intriguing people, I think in 2014. And then I have, like I've said, a special needs child. And so I was like, I wish I had friends who understood this, because my girlfriends from church and when I was a stay-at-home mom had typically developing kids. So I created this group called Wine and Wine. So we whine about our problems, and then we drink wine. And we all have kids with different needs of various levels. And it is such a gift and a blessing. We meet once a month. It's a beautiful group, but there's nothing else to it. It's just friendship. And then my most recent sort of create the things you wish existed is this Inspiration Lab business, which I created for working women. Because when I was going to all these real estate conferences, I mean, to be honest with you, it was like, I mean, no offense, but it was a bunch of white guys on a stage trying to tell you, well, you're younger than most of them, but a bunch of old white guys in general, trying to sort of talk about work-life balance or how to be a good parent. And this also happened to me when I went to the EntreLeadership program with Dave Ramsey, which you and I talked about, where a lot of the people on the stage had stay-at-home spouses, mostly wives. So their advice was really different than a woman who's running a business who has a working husband and what that looks like. And I thought, man, if we could get the guys out of the room and just share our hearts and talk about what it's like to try to take care of our grandparents and our kid and our teams and our clients and ourselves, what would be possible? So we started the Inspiration Lab, and as a luncheon series for 2 or 3 years. I just did it when I had time and energy. And then in February of last year, legitimately because Jimmy Mackin is brilliant and pushed me really hard to launch it into a membership community, we did. And so now we have 123 members in 8 states, and they're just women coming together so that we can really grow ourselves, but also talk about the fact that like personal and professional bleed together. There is no difference. So when you sort of talk about my personal and professional life, like especially in real estate, it's one life. You bring your whole self to work. So let's make sure that your whole self is in a really good, positive place.
I love all that. And the story that you've shared about your son, Oliver, who's at the present time 10, and your husband, Andrew, and just dealing with all of that surprise, really big deal. And something I don't understand myself, because I have fortunately 3 healthy kids, but I can imagine how terrifying all that is. And then also just the idea that, look, if something's not out there, that might be your calling to create it. And I'm a firm believer, of got a strong faith that God has put us all here to live up to our potential. And our potential oftentimes is creating things that just aren't out there at that moment. And so 2 years ago, when Chris Oakley, who was with EntreLeadership at the time, told me at one of their meetings in Nashville to go ahead and do what I thought was the right thing to do, which is to start my own company. He's like, it's not going to be easy, but you can always fall back on one of the larger national brands. You can always fall back on something that is more tried and true, but you will always regret it that you didn't try it on your own first. And I really valued that advice. And I just, when we first spoke on the phone, I just knew that EntreLeadership connection was going to be we were kindred spirits from the get-go. And I was a part of that program for 4 years. I went to basically every event that you could, from the highest level to just the simple one-day events, and was a part of the coaching program on a month-to-month basis, and learned a lot and really credit a lot of what I could do to start a business completely debt-free on my own with my wife's support. And obviously there's other people here in the company that have helped found it, but those are things I would not have been able to do without the help of EntreLeadership. Okay, so let's talk about how in the heck you got into being a broker owner right off the bat. You shared this with me, but most of the time you're required to have some sort of advisory, if you will, or oversight from someone who's an experienced broker. So just if anybody caught that and they're like, wait a second, how'd that happen?
Yeah.
How'd you do that?
I did not break any laws. I don't want to go to jail, y'all. My husband had been in real estate at this point for probably 4 or 5 years. So he mostly works in the film industry, but had helped plenty of people in our family and friends purchase real estate. So he met the requirement in North Carolina to be the broker in charge. So he was in that role. And then after I had the 2 years in North Carolina, you have to have 2 years of full-time experience. Then I took over as broker in charge. So that's why it was a possibility. And I actually I got licensed in March. And then we didn't start Lanier Property Group until the end of August. So I spent a few months at a kind of discount broker in town where Andrew's license was at that time. And it was a good experience. I learned a lot. And I do tell a lot of people, it would have been helpful. Our situation just dictated something different, but to work with a great agent, as in their assistant and buyer's agent for a year or two is not a bad thing. I always miss the opportunity to sort of hear somebody deal with like a really angry seller multiple times, or like little nuances that I think that if you're with someone, you just sort of absorb, that I didn't get to do as much as I think would have been a benefit. So I think for most people, doing the 2 years somewhere with a great leader before you launch out on your own probably makes some sense.
Well, it's great. And I agree. I was a product of working with someone who was a mentor that was 5 years older than me and just absolutely rocking in real estate. And I learned a ton, worked for them for 7 years through 2 different companies, and then had a shot to become a leader myself. I got recruited by a client that owned a real estate company. And then all of a sudden I was like, okay, every person I've ever been mentored by is a company owner. I guess it's that time. And with the help of EntreLeadership, I got there too. And so I think I want to go back into this slow and methodical tortoise and hare approach, because it's really hard for business owners, whether you own a real estate brokerage firm or whether you just own a coffee shop, to avoid some of the trappings of, hey, you could go get an SBA loan, cross-collateralize it on your house, go into debt to have this beautiful office right off the bat. And, when I started my business, 800 square feet, there were 6 of us jammed in there. I recruited friends and people around me that I'd been in the business with for a while, but it was anything but glamorous. It was very humble. And I was actually kind of ticked off at the news reporter that made sure to comment in our press release that, their office is open in Denver and it's 800 square feet or whatever. And I was like, what does that have to do with anything? So what is that like for you to grow slow? We have a company of 8 that we're hiring the 8th person today. And I generally train people who have been in some other industry or some other facet of life instead of hiring the veteran. And I'm not against hiring veterans, but it's a different approach. And so what's your thought process on the training and slow and methodical?
Well, so yeah, we started out in a co-working space, which we were in for 3.5 years, which people commented on a lot. And our first office was legitimately the size of a closet. I don't even know, 20, 30 square feet. Like, honestly, that was our headquarters. One of the beautiful things that happened from working in a co-working space is my overhead was completely controllable. It was a 30-day contract, which is really important. I very much like you, EntreLeadership, not into having debt. We plowed all the money we made back into the business and did not take out any loans, would never put my house up against a business, like just not willing to do that personally. But we started this little space, but one of the most beautiful things that happened is there is an app for beer called Untapped. I don't know if you're a beer drinker. You are? Yes, well, you should get the app if you don't have it. But the CEO, Kurt Taylor, is one of my closest friends now, and Untapped started in our co-working space. And so literally we spent 2.5 years together, growing our teams, learning. And obviously they're a fast growing tech startup that's taken, on investors and very different, but it literally changed my life forever. I don't think I'd be where I am without those friendships. And I think co-working spaces are a great place to start. So of the things in my life that have been so impactful, that was part of it. And a lot of other businesses were trying to start up and launch out of that co-working space. It was just really cool. And I knew even when we were in it, like, I'm going to wish I could come back here. There's some kind of magic. And eventually we outgrew it. Now we have like 2,000 square feet. It's a freestanding building. We have a little sign out front. Like, it makes sense, but we needed to grow to the point where I felt like I knew that I could pay for all that stuff. So I'm all about growing slow from an overhead standpoint, but we grew too fast with agents in 2015, 2016. I think because I didn't know who I was. And you have an advantage from me that you worked in the industry for 7 years. Like I seriously had still only done like 50 deals ever. And I'm trying to recruit and grow a business. I needed to slow my roll a little bit and figure out our unique voice, our system, who we really were. And then I think we started getting the right cultural fit and the right work ethic. And the other thing that we do here that's a little bit weird is, I don't know if it's weird, it's just different. We do everything as a team. Like we don't give awards to each other. We don't have like Julie sold the most sales volume. It's like we set a reward for each quarter and then we do them. We either all get it or no one gets it. And I don't know if that's like the South or my group of people or we're working moms, but like the idea that like 4 of us would go to dinner and 2 people can't come is just like really not appealing. Like we're not even interested in doing that. So this spring in Q2 of last year, I set a goal. It was a really high goal for our team. And I said, if you hit it, we'll go to Las Vegas to the Zillow conference. And they were all like, eh. And I was like, man, I was like, that's foolish. Like these ladies, this is not their thing. I was like, what if I send somebody to deep clean your house? And we blew past our goal, which was already really aggressive, 18%. And it was really, really cool. Like I got more hugs and more thank you notes from that reward than anything else. And that's about knowing and loving your team. Like just because I might want to go to a real estate conference because I'm a conference junkie does not mean that appeals to my team. So I think so much of kind of growing slow and methodically and intentionally is making sure that the people who are investing their 40, 50, 60 hours a week of their time, of their life into your business, that you're loving and caring for them back. And that takes time. You can't speed that up. Like you just have to do that carefully, methodically, and slowly. So I think that has been a huge gift for us as a team and worked really well for our growth. And we're a little bit competitive with each other, but because we're not part of a franchise and we don't look at like MLS rankings, I have no idea where we rank. And I don't care. I honestly don't care. If we're hitting the goals that are important to us and that's all that matters, I think for me, the rankings and checking like how many Instagram followers does somebody have, it's just a total distraction from the work that we're called to do right here.
Well, I love all of that. And on the last point there, I think of my 3 kids who are all elementary school aged, and they happen to be involved in 2 swim teams. Our neighborhood summer swim team, which is very social and very fun, but competitive. We do very well in our area with this swim team. Then they also have joined a competitive swim team. And the component of being on a competitive swim team is always working on your own personal best, that you are swimming against the clock. You're not swimming against any of the people, because a lot of these meets, kids, and these are 7 and 8-year-old kids, but they're coming from all across the state of Colorado, sometimes even from Wyoming, just to the north. And it's incredible as you think about this. It's like there's kids from all over. You've never swam against each other. Unless you get to a certain level where you're in championships and you see the same people, how in the world could you know how they're going to swim? And sometimes it's total blowout because someone doesn't have a seed time. And the whole point is, as you think about that story of your personal best, is every year you should be working to make some improvement from what you did the year prior. And that's success. This idea that you're going to constantly play the comparison game is really going to end up, I think, injuring your ability to continue to progress forward. So I love that whole concept. Uncorked was the name of the startup. Is that right?
Untapped.
Untapped. Gosh, uncorked would be wine, of course. Untapped.
Yes.
I was thinking of Uncorked Kitchen, which our kids go to here in Colorado, which is, but anyways, Untapped. I'll have to check that out. I do enjoy an IPA from every now and again. I try to limit it to a certain number of days a month, but yeah, I do love a good beer. So I'll have to check out Untapped. What was that like? Totally on the topic, but off script here. What was it like to work with someone that was in that same entrepreneurial mindset? You mentioned you learned a couple things. Could you expand on maybe a few of the things that were completely unintentional, just observations of being around another business owner?
Yeah, well, it's cool. So Kurt is the CEO, and Kurt just turned 30. He's so young. And he and his wife just had their first child, Marshall. We were at their baptism. They have really become very close friends of ours. But Kurt worked with his dad. So his dad, George Taylor, has launched, I think, 7 businesses at this point, IPO'd 1 or 2. So watching their family dynamic, but just how hard George, the dad, would push Kurt, and how much he loves pressure and deadlines. Like, they weren't afraid. They were so aggressive. And I just, in the South, we're taught as women to sit still and look pretty. Really, you are. Like, that is like,
wow.
really,
Yeah, and that's something I don't understand, having never grown up in
yeah. It's just a, I mean, it's just a different way of life. And it's not saying that you don't matter, but business is like rocking the boat, making a splash, make a controversial decision, move quickly, like sort of, the Facebook thing of like move fast and break things. To me, I'm like, oh my God, be quiet and let's like make sure nothing scary is going to happen. So it was so, so helpful to be around people who think about the world differently. A fast growing tech startup has all kinds of different problems and challenges than we had in real estate. But what was really cool is that we knew each other's teams. And at the time, their team was probably 12 people. Now they have, I think, close to 100 at their headquarters. They moved downtown in Wilmington, and we moved to a different location. But my team was about the same. So it's just really cool. It's just a lot of friendship. And, the Taylors have really just, they've taught me so much. They've also taught me to believe in myself and trust my gut, which sounds a little bit soft, but it's not soft at all. Like, really learning that your instincts, if you're a business owner and you've been successful for some time, are good. And you lean into those. You don't clamp those down. You like embrace and celebrate that. And you try to sleep, as we were talking about, and take care of yourself. So those instincts are as strong as they can possibly be. And then when you have one, you move very quickly. So, and Lanier Property Group is very much like that. We really embrace speed. If there's an idea and we want to go in a direction, we don't run it through a bunch of, we just move. Like, while other people are thinking about it and putting it in their little spreadsheets and trying to figure it out, like, we've already gotten halfway there.
Oh, I love that.
That we sort of adopted from the tech startup model. I loved the speed at which they were moving.
That's so great. And I agree, because it's very strange, but it feels like you're building an airplane that at the same time is taking off. And it's such a weird concept as a business owner, that there's so many people who are like, what's your plan? Do you have it figured out? Do you have it? And I remember talking to several people as we started our business a couple of years ago, and they were like, okay, how are you going to do this? How are you going to do that? I'm like, we're going to just have to figure it out. And a lot of people, that scares the crap out of them.
I think it's so fun.
Yeah, totally. And you just have to be willing to embrace that. And let's talk about some of these personal growth, just habits that you have reminded me of. One of the things I enjoyed you saying was this: get serious about sleep, but then kind of this concept of social self-care, this sweat and stretch concept. So talk to our audience just about what all these things mean to you, and what these are reminders for you about as we kind of deal with the demands of being, spouse and a parent, and then obviously being a business owner, and put on top of that, your child has special needs. So what are all these things meaning to you?
Well, I got really serious about sleep because I started reading a lot about it, and how high performing teams and high performing individuals are very serious about it. Also, it's free. Like, it doesn't cost anything. What? And water is free. Like, all the most important things you should be doing are free. Stretching is free. You could do it right now. Like, if you're listening, go ahead and do a little stretch. Like, I think that we want something to be sexy or cool. We want to fly across the country to go to a conference, when really we need to go to bed at the same time every night. Like, seriously, that would change your business and your life more than anything. Your spouse will be happy. You're not grumpy. Your kids will like you more. You'll be more creative. So I think that getting back to basics, because real estate is full of like shiny object syndrome. We love a new app, a new technology, a new leader, a shiny new brokerage. So I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. And then with our son, Oliver, he has about 60 hours a week of in-home care. So we kind of fondly call that Oliver Inc., but we have a team of about 6 people that help us in our home. So I'm also really running that. And so that's another opportunity for leadership. That's another opportunity to sort of encourage and correct different things that we're seeing. And you have to really, so in that way, even when I'm home, I'm on. So there's not a lot of off time. And so in order to sort of sustain a lot of energy and be able to pour out and into other people, you have to take, self-care really seriously. And I think at least in the female world, self-care is like bubble baths and wine. And that's like not a good idea. Like the bubble bath part might be a good idea, but so much of the like personal care stuff is really that you see out there is about numbing yourself. And that's not a good idea. Like our path with Oliver has been so emotionally and personally painful. Like if you don't learn to grieve it, if you don't go to therapy, if you don't learn to make peace with it, the fact that it is an ongoing painful process to watch your kid hang out with his cousins and he can't talk and he can't run around, like that just hurts. And it'll hurt every Christmas. And you could either drink too much to numb yourself or try to distract yourself, or you could let yourself feel it. You could let yourself be thankful for the child and the gift that you do have, and you move forward. But I just think a lot of high performing people are operating out of like pretty deep brokenness. And most healthy, whole people have really good habits. Like their whole life will be congruent. Do you know what I mean? They'll have a pretty good marriage, and they'll have a pretty good relationship with their family, and they'll sleep pretty well, and they'll eat pretty well. It's like the person that you meet who like has a terrible relationship with their spouse or hasn't talked to their family in 50 years. Like it makes me wonder, because I'm like, it's not like my family's perfect or we always get along, but like it's a personal importance to me that we can't put family first on the wall here and then I not live it out. Like that's not right. Put something else on the wall. Like have fun first. Like that's okay if that's your value. And another thing I would say with the family first piece, I was really troubled by the fact that I wasn't seeing my mom and grandmother who live in town here as much. And so we created this Sunday supper rhythm. So every Sunday we get together for supper, mostly at my house because of Oliver's care needs. And it's just been really good. Andrew's parents come, my mom and grandmother come, and it just is once a week where we have this touch point. And they look forward to it and we look forward to it. And I just feel like if you say people are important in your life and then they're not on your calendar, like you're going to have to make an adjustment.
There's so much in that. And we didn't talk about this. And for those of you that haven't run a podcast or done speaking gigs, or I'm going to be emceeing the event that Stephanie is speaking at, you do a lot of prep, and you do the prep so that it all sounds congruent, to use the word that you used. But I'm going to be really vulnerable. For the last 2 months, I've really been focusing, with the blessing of my wife, Courtney, on limiting the amount of alcohol I drink. I found that over the past few years, really, I could probably go back 20 years and talk about this, but really for the past couple of years of being a high performer, I would, and I don't ever think I was an alcoholic, and there's nothing wrong with that statement. There's a lot of people that I know that have said that they are an alcoholic, and that's something that is, I think, an important realization. But I don't ever think I got to that level. But I do know that there's a lot of experiences I've had in my life where things have happened, and under the influence of alcohol, they're never like, oh wow, moments where I feel like, man, that was the best decision I've ever made, or that was a wonderful thing as I was, cracking open a couple of beers. And so in October, right after our kids' fall break, my wife and I had a discussion where I said, I think I really need to just kind of limit the 3 beers after work to kind of decompress, to chill out. And in the past 2 months, and this is just my journey, I'm not saying it's right, wrong, or whatever, but I kind of picked a couple of certain spots, and this is over the holiday season, November and December, and over 2/3 of the last 2 months, I didn't drink anything. And the days that I did, I was like, 2, 3, whatever, just try to, kind of be social, but not have this be like an everyday thing. And I will say to you, the sleep part of my life immediately improved. I didn't realize just how horribly I was sleeping. And I've always been a very sound sleeper, but that was one of the biggest realizations in the last couple of months. The other was that I would get angry, or I'd get frustrated, or I'd have some emotion in the evening at home because our kids are running around and they're all the same age, or you'd have to be frustrated. And I would self-reflect in the morning and blame it on like, gosh, I was drinking or I was drunk, and that must be the reason I was feeling that way, and I was feeling bad about it. Then I wouldn't drink and I'd still feel that way. And I'm like, no, actually that was like a legitimate emotion, and I addressed it and I felt it real in that moment. And so for me, it was actually very helpful. I'm still going on that path. typically a day a week, a weekend day. You know, I like to unwind when I know I don't have to work and I know that everything's done and we're just chilling. And one of my basic rules is my wife, Courtney's got to be there. And it's typically got to be at our house. So I'm not driving anywhere, because I was just getting to the moment where, and if you're a real estate agent out there and you've gone to happy hour after happy hour after happy hour, it's like, we're such a social industry. And it just seems like and I get emails all the time, like, hey, you want to get together for a drink? And it's like, pretty much anymore, the answer is no. And it's not because I don't like you, but I'll get coffee, I'll get breakfast, but 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, I'm racing home. I'll take a call if I need to, and I know there's others that do listing appointments late at night, but that's been a real struggle for me. And you didn't know that, but I think it's important for people to hear that I don't have it all figured out. I'm a constant work in progress, and I'm trying to figure it out as I go. But we run into these moments of stress. And I think you're right, that self-care is like, go draw a bath and pour yourself a glass of wine, and in moderation, that's okay. But if that's the solution every day, it becomes problematic. So that's something that maybe people didn't know about me.
Well, you know what, Kyle, like, I think it's really brave of you to share that, but our industry, I think many of us in the real estate industry, some of our worst decisions have been wrapped around these, alcohol fueled things. Like, you go to a real estate conference and you're getting up to go to a session at 8 a.m. and you're seeing people come in from the night before. Like, it's kind of a weird culture layered on top of real estate that's sort of, certainly coming out of like the social work world. I was shocked by, because social workers are too cheap. Like, we don't make any money, so you can only afford like one glass of wine. Real estate's so different. So I think it's really easy to sort of, get distracted and to sort of numb ourselves from like actually having feelings, and because we're going so fast. But I think that that's just part of maturity and growing forward in our life. And I think that also understanding the vices that appeal to you is just critical to self-awareness. We all have them. They're different for different people. But in real estate, I would say that most people have can understand where you're coming from. And I think we all just have to look at those things and say, same thing with social media. I mean, if you're spending 3 hours a day on social media, like, that could be your beer. Might need to get you seriously. I mean, it's changing your brain in the same way alcohol is. So you kind of got to think about that.
Yeah, that is incredible, because you're right. And going on the idea of self-awareness. So you mentioned therapy a couple minutes ago. I'll be vulnerable again. Through the advice of Brad Allen, when I was in South Carolina masterminding at his office, he's like, look, and we actually recorded a podcast about this when we were talking about hiring people. He's like, look, I'm not embarrassed to say, he's like, my wife's a psychologist and I go to therapy. And he's like, some might look at it as coaching. And I've talked about many coaches that aren't psychologists or psychiatrists, but I do go to therapy. There's actually, fortunately, in our building, a clinical psychologist that's downstairs. And we've actually run through a couple of exercises where we've done dual therapy with a couple of people in our team where we have some disputes. And one of the things that she has said to me, the therapist, is that oftentimes being successful is very much wrapped in self-awareness. It's critical for success and for improvement. And I would just, there's a lot of movement and I think real positive stuff, and just that it's okay to not have it all figured out. And I think we existed in a world for centuries where, especially before, I think, women being in the workplace predominantly, which is great and a wonderful development here over the past couple of decades. But you'd have guys just kind of go to work, take care of business. They'd probably go to the bar afterwards after being in the mill or the factory or whatever. They come home, wash, rinse, repeat. They do it again every single day, and they don't share their feelings much. And it's just kind of like stiff upper lip. Let's just keep moving on. There's no crying in business, to steal Tom Hanksism. So I think it's important. You've got to figure out what it takes as a high performer to be able to use healthy mechanisms to deal with the stress. You've got some personal examples of growing up in the industry, I should say, with a child that's got special needs, and you're learning that on the fly, and you've got all these people that are helping you out with that, and you're running a business, and you've got all these other things. You've got passion projects of yours. I had a brother pass away in 2011 when he was 24 years old. He grew up with a congenital heart defect, but being the oldest of 6 kids and watching my parents care for a special needs child, I will tell you that it was a very different family experience from some others. I'm not at all saying that it was bad or my parents were doing something wrong. It was just they were doing everything they could to give the care that they needed to the person who needed the care the most. And there's a thought in parenting that oftentimes parents, if you've got multiple children, are very much focused on kind of the lowest common denominator of their children. Whoever is doing the worst, that's kind of who they gravitate towards and give the most support to. And sometimes the people who are excelling in life in the family are not getting as much support. And that's hard as a parent to have to make that choice. You have the one, but obviously it's difficult. It's difficult to deal with all that. And you do it by getting help, and you get the right approach by having therapy and other people who are positive influences in your life. Love that. Just love that whole concept. So that helps you with emotional bandwidth. It's something that you've talked to me about. That emotional bandwidth, I think, allows you to continue to progress forward. And so what are some things, as you think about that bandwidth maybe expanding here, as you've got a few years of operating a business, you've obviously got a group of people that are growing slow but methodically. What's around the bend for you? What's something that excites you maybe in the next 3 to 5 years that we can be looking forward to?
I don't know. I'm so excited, man. I'm always dancing in the car around the office. This is so much fun. Like, I can't believe you're allowed to just start a business or a second one. So I'm really excited about where the real estate business is. We have our first development project, which was something on my wish list way back when. And I still have some goals in real estate that I haven't checked off my list, but a lot of them I have, and that's been really fun. But the thing I'm most excited about right now is the second business, the Inspiration Lab, and where it might go and the impact that we might have in the lives of working women. We have an event coming up on Saturday where I wrote a 28-page workbook that sort of explains my methodology and thinking about how to get so much done. I get asked that all the time. How do you do it all? And there's a method to the madness. And so I wrote this workbook to sort of help people work through that. And then we're going to get together and I'm going to place the women in lab groups. So they'll have 6 people to walk through this entire year with. And I think that's what women and men really are hungry for, is this community. It's like if you've been in church, it's like a small group is a great way to explain it. And so I'll be curious to see if this idea works. I mean, I don't know if it will, but we're going to try it. And we're going to see what happens. And so I'm really excited about that because it can be lonely and it doesn't need to be. And one of the things I've learned about the Inspiration Lab is, like, so many of the speakers, there'll be women who like have these amazing businesses. They're beautiful. They have children. They have a cute husband. They're a member of this or that club. Like, I don't know. They seem to have it all together. And I make them share vulnerable things when they speak, or I'm not interested in having them talk, because women so easily get intimidated by each other. And I think that, and that comes out of brokenness and insecurity, but when you share the real truth, it just builds community. And so it's been really fun to build a group of people based off of this idea that we're all broken, we're all messed up. And that in the group, any one person will be struggling with infertility, IVF treatments, a divorce, they're single and they don't want to be, they have a parent who's getting sick, they're in debt and it's stressful. Like, in any group of 100 people, you could just put pods of people together around these topics. And so the more that we kind of break down this Instagram perfection world, the better it is. And it's just been so fun to watch that. And in my own life, I lean into that. Like, if I meet a woman, I'm like, oh my God, I'm intimidated. I try to lean into the friendship. So Vanessa Bergmark, I don't know if you know her, but she has Red Oak Realty in San Francisco. Is it in San Francisco?
I think so. I don't know her personally, but I think you're right. Yeah, I think you're right.
It's yeah, or like Oakland or something. But anyway, I was so intimidated by her Inman conferences for years. And then I was like, forget it. This is dumb. Like, I just want to see if we could be friends. And she is one of the sweetest, kindest people I know. When Oliver was in the hospital 2 years ago, we actually almost lost him. He was very, very sick. And she got a group of all kinds of real estate people from across the country, Jack Miller from T3 and Art Davison from 1000 Watt, different people that I know and I've worked with over the years. They put together this like incredibly generous spa package for us, sent Oliver all these toys. And it's just like, how silly that I would have missed out on her friendship, because she's just like this super sleek and sexy and smart, big city put together lady. And my own insecurities could have stood between me and her. Like, how silly. Like, I'm so glad I just brought my like Southern minivan stuff to the table and said like, hey, let's be buddies. And she was like, that's cool. So I just want to encourage more women to do that because we're missing out unnecessarily.
You know, by the way, men are about as insecure too, as you talk about that. So the whole idea that we got it all figured out and guys don't share our feelings and just all this other stuff.
Oh, y'all are a mess. You're a mess. I'm telling you, women, we're more in touch with it. Y'all just sort of suppress it more.
So it's really interesting because, and I'm not bashful to say this, I tend to be more, at least more feminine with my emotions. I mean, I tend to be emotions on my sleeve, like, just heart is out there. And most guys look at me like I'm half crazy when I'm like, man, I'm having a tough day or this sucks. Like I you know, a couple of different conversations as I started the business where they're like, you could tell they're like, okay, cool. Well, good luck with that. And it was like very dismissive.
Right.
And I just love that you said that when you interact with speakers that you require them to be vulnerable. Some of the best podcasts I've ever recorded are people sharing really messy, really emotional stuff. It's how I got recognized by Realtor Magazine with 30 Under 30 because I shared how my brother died. And I was like, it was a mess. We had twins that got born in March. I left my mentor 2 months later, and then my brother died. All that happened in 90 days. And oh, by the way, you're supposed to like have it all figured out and march into work and be okay with everything. And life is really tough. And I think that a lot of times I liken it to people who are walking around like emotional zombies. And this idea of like Dawn of the Dead or whatever the zombie shows are, but like just this idea that people are numbing themselves, self-medicating, marching through life without a real like connection. And it's so sad. It's really, really sad. And I would just ask you, one of our final questions is always kind of wrapped up in vulnerability and or failure, that a lot of people get bent out of shape sharing things, but what are some things that kind of you have learned from falling down and then most importantly, getting back up again? I think that failure is a very important discussion as it relates to learning in business. And my original mentor would say, look, these are learning experiences. You ought to mess up on a pretty much daily basis, but clarify what you learned, and then let's try to find a way to learn about it and move on and improve. So what are your thoughts on failure and just talking about being vulnerable?
Well, I definitely want to talk about failure, but I want to sort of go back to that last vulnerable thing we were talking about. Do you know the Japanese idea? It's called different things, but one of the names is kintsugi, where they repair a bowl that's been broken. Do you know about this? Have you heard about this?
Yes, I have actually heard about this recently, and I don't remember if it was EntreLeadership or
it probably was. Yeah.
One of the programs, though, one of the coaching things, but I saw that there's like a very distinct process with these ancient bowls, and that they don't get thrown away. They get repaired, and maybe it was a pastor that was talking about this. Anyways, I would love to hear you talk about that.
Well, yeah. So the idea is that, and Japanese culture is obviously very different than American culture, but instead of throwing away an important piece of broken pottery, they gather all the pieces together and very slowly they piece it, they sort of paint it back together, if you will. It takes a long time because you think about something that's been shattered takes a long time. Like the thing you're sharing with me in 90 days that happened had some kind of shattering effect on you probably. And you won't just be able to pop that together in 90 days. That's impossible. And so this process of sort of piecing it back together slowly, but what's beautiful, I think, in the Japanese culture is that not only is it stronger for being broken, just like a bone, right? But then they put gold leaf on all the cracks because they think it's more beautiful for being broken. And it's part of the history of this vessel, and that it can serve people better and in many ways be more dazzling because of its history. And I just think that's such a cool way to think about maybe not even just failures, but mistakes and failures and brokenness, that you are stronger and more beautiful and in many ways more useful if you will allow yourself the process to be healed and you don't try to hide it, but you just sort of say, this is part of my story. Many of us, our stories are things we didn't choose. Like, you didn't sign up for certain parts of your story and I didn't either. And yet it's not an accident. So that's something we talk about a lot in the Inspiration Lab, is sort of learning to embrace your story. And I think that relates to mistakes. I'll sort of jump into that question for you. I think mistakes are different than failures. So mistake is like, I don't know, you left the home warranty off the closing statement, right? That's like not a big deal. Almost not even worth thinking about. Just like, don't do it again. Make yourself a little system for it. A failure is big. A failure will mark your life in many ways. It will probably be costly to you and to other people. It could cause harm to other people. And those are really serious, and you shouldn't have a lot of failures. So I think there's a celebration sometimes in our business world of failure. And I think mistakes are a gift. We have a manifesto at our company of sort of what we believe, and we have that mistakes are celebrated for the gifts that they are. But I think failures, when you have them, you need to process them. You need to make a system and a way to not repeat them. I think you need to understand the self-awareness that led you to that mistake. Like if you had a failure of hiring because something went really sideways with a person, that hurts your organization and that hurts your culture. And so you need to figure out what also, like, are you excitable? Were you impatient? Did your pride get the best of you? Like, how did you end up making this failure decision? And I think kind of going from there. So I think they're two different things, and to use them interchangeably, the nuance is important because sort of the truth lies in the distinction between the two. But we've had, I'll tell you, like, I don't know, this is a funny failures, but we had this Easter egg event we were trying to do because I thought this would be this brilliant marketing event, an idea. And so we had it in a park, and we were going to have the Easter Bunny come, and we had 2,000 eggs, and we were going to have a miniature petting zoo with like baby piglets and little ducks and stuff. I was so excited. And so it started raining really hard that morning, and we were like, oh my gosh, you can't do an Easter egg hunt. So we didn't really have a plan B, but we picked, a church said we could use their fellowship hall. What we neglected to do, because this was a free event, was to gather people's contact information. So hundreds of people came to the park in the rain, saw our little sign, called, emailed, Facebook messaged that we had ruined their kids' Easter, that we were the worst real estate company in town, that they would never use us. I mean, it was a disaster. On top of that, the people who got the news to come to the church, we threw like 2,000 eggs out on the floor of the gymnasium, and we like said go, and the kids are like hitting it, like it's like hockey, you know, like, you know, you have 3 little kids, like imagine, there's just, it was a bad plan. And when the petting zoo came, they did not bring a tiny baby piglet. They brought a giant hog, like this huge, nasty, smelly thing. They brought like life-size chickens, like not life-size, full-size chickens, like not little baby chicks, like, I mean, the whole thing was just a disaster. So anyway, my point being, we've had a lot of marketing wins. We've won awards for it. It's cool. But for every marketing win, there is like an outright failure. We had to clean up our Facebook page, call people, ask if they could take the reviews down from the Easter egg thing that went wrong. So anyway, that's kind of a silly failure, but it's not silly in that we really, really did not understand how to run a public event, and we didn't understand the implications of doing that. And so we have never done that again. And that's sort of not something we do in our firm anymore. But that's a funny example. A serious example is in 2015, I just miscalculated our cash flow. And so we had to dip into our equity line really significantly. And that was really scary. And I felt like a failure for the entire first quarter that followed that. No, it was 2014, I think. Anyway, we had like every year we had profits and we were doing great. And I made some foolish errors, and a lot of really high price deals fell apart at the end of the year. And so since then, I've really been able to manage our cash flow better, but that was really hard and humbling. It also taught me that I don't know how to read my balance sheet. Back then, I really didn't understand the difference between the two. And so that's something I'm also passionate about. In the Inspiration Lab, we have some programs for women who run businesses, because you would be amazed at the people who have multi-million-dollar businesses and honestly don't know how to read their financial statements and feel a little embarrassed about it. And so we come together and just say, like, bring your QuickBooks, let's pull it up and let's talk about it. You know, it's not rocket science. So that was another big failure that hurt. It took a long time to dig out of that hole, but we did.
Yeah, the money failures are the ones that really sting. The discussion of the Easter egg hunt, I mean, you laugh because you can see this, it's a total comedy of errors, right? Like everything that could go wrong did. And that's when things you just got to laugh at stuff like that and just say, oh my gosh, well, those are 2 very good examples. The final question I ask everyone, and you alluded to this, you know, probably 20, 30 minutes ago in our discussion, and I like that you did, because you kind of prepped it. there's this concept that people give advice from failure and avoid this because I did that. And so
Yeah.
I've been asking high performers this question of Dear Younger Me, which comes from a Christian song by the band Mercy Me. And it's the idea that you'd write yourself a letter. I like to call, this is my spin on it, it's the advice you wish you knew when you were 22. So it's you're writing a letter to yourself. You say, hey, now that I've kind of lived some years, I'm an adult, I've run some businesses, I understand things, and I'm wise. Some 22-year-old comes into your company or comes into your presence, maybe in a small group or something, and says, hey, what advice would you give to someone in my position? You know, as a young person, maybe right out of college, that's just trying to figure life out. So Stephanie, what's that advice that you might give to someone in their early 20s?
Well, I would give to myself or to just anyone generically, or both?
Both, because I think the question has two different lenses that are appropriate. You know, when you say this is what I would advise myself, it's usually because of some sort of experience. But then also, I would imagine as a thought leader, as a presenter, as an inspiration. I mean, I say that very candidly, just getting to know your story. People continue to come up to you asking for advice. And so I would imagine this is a question that happens quite often. So maybe answer it in both ways, and then we'll close up the show.
Yeah, well, I think they're sort of connected. So when I was little, I wanted to be, I first wanted to work at Food Lion as a person who worked at the cash register, because the thing that beeped, you know, that little X thing that beeped, I just thought that was so cool. But my parents put me in pageants when they got divorced instead of sending me to therapy. Makes total sense, right? Like, I don't understand that, but
totally
anyway,
connected.
I was in pageants, and when I would be on stage and I'd say, like, when I grow up, I'd be like, I'm Stephanie Lanier, or Stephanie Klein, and when I grow up, I want to work at a grocery store. And my mom would be in the back, like in the audience like this. So then I went to a Reba McEntire concert, and it was awesome. And she like flew, this was like an outdoor amphitheater. She was like in fringe, and she came out of like the ceiling across and I was like, I want that job. And my dad or my mom or all the people in my life are like, you're an average singer, you know, like, you know, and I was like, I'll probably just help people. Like, I'll just do something where I help people. But I think my advice would be, whatever you wanted to be or do when you were 6, 7, or 8, there's a cord of truth in that. There's a thread, and you need to pay attention to it. Now, do I need to be flying through an amphitheater and fringe? No. But do I have a message and a story I want to tell people? Yes. Do I like to be on stage? Yes. Was I taught in a Christian world that was bad and I shouldn't want to sort of shine? Yes. So I sort of internalized all these things, like be a servant, you know, sit still, look pretty, these sort of things. But inside, I always knew I was a leader. And so I had these conflicting sort of, my worldview was so black and white as a kid. And I think even in your 20s it is. And often the truth is some mix of all of that stuff. Like, I wanted to help people. When I played with my other friends that would come over, my parents would get really frustrated because I was always the teacher. Like, I didn't want to be the student. I was like, that's not fun. Like, and I remember my grandmother wrote me a letter saying, like, I was really bossy and I needed to be careful because I wouldn't have friends. And I think that if somebody had sort of leaned in younger with me and said, oh, you have leadership possibilities, and let me show you what that looks like, I think I'm an okay leader now, and I hope one day I'm a great leader, but it would have already put me on a path earlier. So I guess my answer is, if you're 22, remember who you were in kindergarten or first grade before you knew who you were supposed to be. If you are reading books in a tree, if you are building things, if you are dreaming up costumes for a play, whoever you are really meant to be and called to be, a lot of the answers are there. And you need to go explore that and find that.
Oh, I just love that. And I would add just a little touch to it, that you know those moments again when you experience them. And I'm not friends with him, but I love to listen to his podcast. Brian Buffini talks about these as tuning fork moments, where when you do something and all of a sudden either time passes by and you're like, whoa, that was 4 hours and it felt like nothing. Or you go home and talk to your spouse, significant other, best friend, and you're like just going bananas talking about that experience. Those are those little tuning fork experiences as you're on your path to purpose. And I think it's really cool, because I agree, having twins that are second graders and a third grader, they're in that spot and you can see they are uniquely wired. they're from the same parents, same, two sets of DNA, creating them, and they're so different and so wonderful. And oftentimes I think we think of the bad side as parents. We're like, oh, that's like your mom, or, oh, that's like my dad, or it's like both the dads, or whatever, like the negative qualities. But there is some real truth to the things that you did when you were just make-believe in the backyard. What are you doing? And there's plenty of realtors that I know that are like, I remember going to kindergarten or first grade, show and tell, dressed up as a realtor with a sticker. And that's their story. And they knew that was what they were destined for. Stephanie, I am so excited to meet you in person in South Carolina, in Charleston. Gosh, I almost said Columbia. But
no, we are not going to Columbia.
That's right. I might, if I, get bad directions or something, I might end up in Columbia, South Carolina. But in Charleston, I'm excited to meet with you. I sincerely appreciate your time and your energy. For all of our podcast listeners, please remember to leave us a 5-star review if you enjoyed this episode. Hit subscribe. We're now on Spotify in addition to iTunes and YouTube. So for all of our podcasts, producer Kayla Davis, the people that help us here at Calibrate Real Estate, for Stephanie Lanier, I'm Kyle Malnati, and as I love to say, we will see you around the neighborhood. Thanks, everybody. See you later.